Second by Member Baines. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Measure passes 7-0. Thank you. That completes the consent items. Now we go to 9AMA, the workshop update on city departmental review of high-speed rail environmental impact. Scott?
Good morning, Council President, Council members, and colleagues. I'm here to present an update to the Council on the City departmental review of the High-Speed Rail Authority 2 EIRs, Merced to Fresno and Fresno to Bakersfield. As we begin, I just want to acknowledge Jeff Abercrombie from the High-Speed Rail Authority, who's here with us in the chamber. He and his team have worked long hours and spent a great deal of time with us on a very complicated project to try to make it the best possible. However, as we go through the presentation and walk through some of the comments, you'll see that there are still some concerns, and we feel there's still some ground to cover on that. So overall, I do want to also highlight one piece of news. High-Speed Rail Authority issued a press release yesterday, and the Fresno to Bakersfield segment to the south, they're still taking comments by the 13th, but due to some new alignments and studies in Kings County, they will actually be recirculating that EIR as well with that new information in early 2012. However, it's still our goal to provide comments by the due date next Thursday, the 13th. This is the overall corridor citywide. On screen, that shows yellow, the high-speed rail alignment. The magenta, purplish colors were Burlington Northern End, and green is the Union Pacific. Kind of overall, just a quick walk through the corridor. Entering on the south, high-speed rail would be parallel to Burlington Northern. That's roughly between Cedar and Maple Avenue, and that's the line that goes south to Hanford. So as we come into the southern end of the city, there's a colored version of that, and this is also where the heavy maintenance facility was proposed by our Fresno Works team, and that is included in the EIR as a potential site for the heavy maintenance facility, which would employ several hundred to perhaps even 2,000 workers, service the trains, and it'd be that main central site in California where that would occur. On the northern end of the city, they fly over the San Joaquin River and over the Union Pacific tracks, elevated at that point. Here's an aerial view of the San Joaquin River down there, and you can see Highway 99 and the Union Pacific tracks. High-speed rail would come in just to the east, so it would be further up on the picture. But before you get into Old Herndon Town, the high-speed rail would cross from the east side to the west side, and it would continue aerially over Herndon Avenue. It would go back to at grade by the time we get to the future Veterans Boulevard alignment, which is generally where Bullard Avenue would have crossed 99 if we had not, as a city, planned for a diagonal roadway instead of Bullard Avenue east-west. Through most of the city, it is at grade. There's a sweeping curve between roughly between the Jensen Avenue overpass of the railroads and where North Avenue hits 99. That's to basically get from Burlington Northern to Union Pacific to being parallel to those tracks. And it's all at grade in the city except for at the northern end where I'd mentioned near the San Joaquin River and Herndon Avenue being aerial, elevated about 30 feet, and also flying over Highway 99 in southeast Fresno. One location where in the EIR it's proposed to be depressed, meaning lowered below the streets, would be going under Highway 180 near downtown, basically starting near Roding Park, dropping low, and then coming back to grade near Stanislaus Street. So here's some photos of generally what the Union Pacific right-of-way looks like. High-speed rail would be immediately next to it, right on the ground, and you can see just from the photographs all along, we're talking several hundred, hundreds of parcels impacted, numerous businesses. Here's another shot looking into the downtown, and again, you can see 41 flying over and lots of industrial businesses between G Street and Union Pacific where high-speed rail is proposed through that area. Just a quick overview. Basically, purpose of their draft EIR and environmental impact statement is to provide information to the public and decision makers and provide opportunity for comment, and then to identify a preferred alignment, a preferred alternative. I want to note to the council, within the city of Fresno, there is only one alignment in the EIR. Although for both segments there are multiple alignments. For example, what happens in Madera County? Is it a Union Pacific alignment? Is it a Burlington Northern? Where's the crossover to start heading towards San Jose? There are many alignments for that. To the south, there are alignments, Kings County, Kern County. Both in Fresno, it is only one, just to be clear on that. Project schedule that's being proposed. Right now we're toward the end of 2011, EIR comment period closing. And then the proposed schedule is in 2012 to certify that EIR, award design build contracts, break ground, acquire the right-of-way for the project, and finish all the construction by 2017. And I do want to highlight it's proposed as design build, meaning that with a very conceptual plan and some specifications and EIR requirements, it'd be turned over to a contractor who would hire their own engineers to finish the plans. But it's very different than a traditional process where you can work out all those issues before hiring a contractor. So it gets the contractor on board, construction starts, and you're working out a lot of issues as you go. Now kind of to the big picture, the overall summary of the city's, our draft comments at this time. Again, I want to highlight the purpose of today. It's really an information discussion item. Staff is not asking for a vote or approval on the item, but this is opportunity for the council to continue to weigh in, continue to engage, provide that input, and as staff, then we will seek to incorporate that as we finalize that comments letter on the 13th. So big picture items, underpasses versus overpasses, that's very significant. We'll go through some slides on that. Construction impacts from those 5 years of having the city under construction. Just order of magnitude, I would estimate that this is upwards of $2 billion worth of construction within the city of Fresno. And order of magnitude wise, that's kind of like doing all of the 41, 168, and 180 freeway projects that have occurred over about the last 30 years, all kind of rolled up into one. Then just adequacy and timing of the traffic mitigations. A big one is economic impacts to businesses. We also some other issues with sewer, water, noise, a little bit on historic needing more analysis, and again the treatment at Roding Park. The high-speed rail project proposes overpasses at every location where a street would cross high-speed rail, except for Fresno Street, that's currently an underpass here in downtown, and that'd just be extended. But every other one is proposed as an overpass. And in the photos, or just from your own experience, I'd highlight to the council, those would be very similar to the Stanislaus and Tuolumne bridges in downtown. The only difference being what's proposed in the plans is not an open structure that you could see through, but what's proposed is typically vertical retaining walls, concrete walls that go up straight 20 to 30 feet in the air, all the way through that area. So and that would be backing up to homes, to businesses, or cutting off access to them. By comparison, here's a photo. This is the Marks Avenue underpass the city constructed in northwest Fresno back in 2002, 2003. Again, Fresno Street, Shaw Avenue. There are other underpasses in the city that provide a lot of benefits. They're shorter. They cut off less streets. They provide better circulation. There are ADA concerns with the overpasses being proposed. They're in fact so steep that they would not meet ADA. And a parallel separate pedestrian bridge would have to be built by high-speed rail. And so that, again, they'd be steeper than anything in the city, than any freeway off-ramps, and so on. Socioeconomic impacts of those, as well as visual, aesthetics, blight, potential for graffiti, and so forth. And underpasses, we feel, are very doable and would properly mitigate those. We've listed the crossings we're referring to: Shaw, McKinley, Olive, Stanislaus, Tuolumne, Tulare Street, and Ventura. Just a couple of photos. What do those look like? Olive Avenue, of course, is at the corner of Roding Park. So to build an overpass there would cut off access at the DMV site, and it would also create about a 30-foot high concrete retaining wall at the corner of Roding Park. And again, the sense is that that would not be consistent with the character of the park, and that there's a better way to do that. Likewise, at Tulare Street in downtown, to build an overpass there, the touchdown point would basically be between Home Run Alley and the Fulton Mall. And it would put, again, a 20-foot high concrete bridge right at the corner of the stadium, of the baseball stadium. Construction impacts are, currently the EIR just says that a traffic management plan will be prepared during final design. And we're keeping in mind that final design is when the contractor has already been hired. So a big concern for us as staff is that without specificity there, there's a big difference between if the engineering consultants and contractor feel that it's necessary to close, for example, the Clinton Avenue overpass for a year and a half, which has been discussed, versus staging it properly, keeping that open. Likewise with Shaw Avenue. This is a photo of Shaw Avenue and what happens just when a train stops, or a train comes through and it backs up traffic for a half mile in each direction. And again, to limit Shaw Avenue to anything less than 4 lanes would just be really disastrous to that area. So again, comments are to put those mitigation measures and to be specific, not to just to leave it to a generic traffic management plan. Timing and adequacy of the measures, I just want to highlight briefly for the council, there are a number of impacts that would not occur immediately due to these road closures, but as the city grows, it would create the need for improvements that otherwise growth in the city would not require. There are traffic signals, intersection widening, and right now the EIR again is not specific to say it would be done now. And city's position, we believe, should be that those should be incorporated into the project. A lot of those are due to things like, for example, along 99, where 99 would be shifted, that three exit ramps from 99 would be closed, Dakota, Shields, and Princeton, shifting a lot of traffic around in the area west of 99 between Clinton and Ashland. So again, the feeling is that our determination is that that should not occur in 2020 or 2030, but part of the initial construction. Displacement of businesses is a really significant concern. We have talked with the EDC. We have talked with some commercial industrial developers on what does this really look like. And again, the number of parcels and business impacts are in the hundreds. And so one concern is one concern is the loss of sales tax, property tax, potential for blight, leaving small remainders that become uneconomic to develop, but also just thinking through the process, if we have 300 new site plans to deal with, another factor is how does the city then process those and get the businesses to a new location? It would just it would overwhelm the system. And so one of our comments and recommendations will be that the authority would fund a team to focus on that business relocation, processing new site plans, processing new building permits, making that occur. A big concern that businesses have raised is if I get my payment, that then what happens between the time when I get the payment and have to move, and then if it takes the city of Fresno a year and a half or 2 years to process all of that because we're just overwhelmed by the magnitude of it. So that's the comment there. On this exhibit, just here's downtown, and everything in yellow, everything between G Street and the railroad tracks would be impacted from end to end. The Fresno Rescue Mission is one of those who would be impacted. Some of the buildings would be lost. Some may be able to remain. But again, as we did a field tour of the site, looking at it, my sense is just that one project alone could consume someone for quite a number of hours to make that work. So getting that team in place to deal with business relocation is critical. Within the downtown, as I mentioned, Council, there are only two alternatives in the EIR. One is to not build the project at all, a no project, and the other is at grade. And as we had Precision Civil Engineering spend quite a bit of effort looking at this, Precision was actually able to identify an additional 5 alternatives that dealt with basically lowering high-speed rail, building it below the street level through downtown. Again, and that's not anything that's that radical or unusual. It has been done in Reno, or even, for example, when freeways have been built in Fresno, there was never a thought of, well, we can't lower the freeway. No, of course the freeway's lowered. Typically, it's below the street, and then it's above, and they balance the earthwork and so forth. So Precision has developed a number of cross sections. This one shows basically what's proposed, freight tracks and high-speed rail right next to each other with some separation, but both on ground level. There are potentials for high-speed rail to go in a trench parallel to Union Pacific. There's potential to use cut slopes, embankments to do that. They've also identified kind of hybrid alternatives, potentially with one freight track being lowered, one staying up above, or what's really the preferred, what's really the ideal for the city is that we would see Union Pacific and high-speed rail both lowered through downtown in a trench, and it would preserve all the street crossings at the same ground level. Again, that we acknowledge, we recognize that would be quite a bit more expensive than what's proposed. However, it is currently not evaluated in the EIR. And so what we'd be asking for in a comment is simply to evaluate that. And if that has merit, then that may indeed be something that's worthwhile. But to date, it has really not been formally studied, with the exception of our own consultant team. Again, this just shows the level of effort Precision's gone through. That's obviously too small to see, but they've done their homework, lots of research on each of these options. Real quickly, noise and vibration is also of concern. It was addressed in the EIR, but a couple areas, Forestier Underground Gardens is only about 30 feet from where the Shaw grade separation would touch down. And that involves a lot of drilling, driving of piles, heavy construction, and so we feel that needs to be addressed. And also there's concern about some of the species at the zoo as to whether construction of high-speed rail and the ongoing operation has really evaluated that and what needs to be done to make the zoo whole. The Historic Preservation Commission also reviewed the project, and again, no major concerns, but there were a number of sites that HPC felt were not evaluated enough. So we are forwarding those comments along, such as the Belmont Circle, the historic Belmont Underpass, Forestier Underground Gardens, and a number of other properties. Lastly, I want to focus just on Roding Park. The council adopted certified an EIR for the zoo expansion and master plan, which includes a new access point to Golden State. Along Roding Park, Golden State is proposed by the High-Speed Rail Authority to be removed and not put back. So that is not consistent with the master plan. And again, we don't feel that that's insurmountable, but we just want to keep that dialogue going with the authority on how the zoo project and Roding Park can be made whole, versus simply taking Golden State away and not doing anything else. So we want to keep that dialogue going and propose to comment in that regard. Just more photos of Roding Park and again, seeing Golden State go away. Real quickly, lastly, just want to highlight some positive aspects. It's not all negative. Number one is a grade-separated Union Pacific corridor from end to end. Only Herndon Avenue would be would remain as an at-grade crossing under the proposed design. Downtown high-speed rail station. The authorities included the city's preferred site in the EIR, and that's at Mariposa Street near the historic Southern Pacific Railroad Depot, and also reconstruction of a fairly confusing Fresno and H Broadway Plaza intersection to better serve that station is included in the plans. Obviously, the heavy maintenance facility, and one other item is a portion of Veterans Boulevard, perhaps a more significant portion of Veterans to be constructed by high-speed rail, basically to offset the loss of Carnegie Avenue as an at-grade crossing. And then, of course, with the station comes other things like station area development, revitalization of downtown is being anticipated by that. With that, also we have our consultant team here from Precision. They'll be able to answer any detailed questions, especially about the trench. And with that, just want to turn it over to the council, and we're available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. City Attorney, does this have to go to the public, or just...
This is a workshop, and so
Okay.
it is at the council's discretion. Typically, workshops do
Okay.
not go out to the public.
Councilmember Westerlin?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mosier, for that, and thank you, folks from Precision Engineering. I appreciate all of the work that went into it. Mr. Mosier, I do have some questions for you. You know, on the design build, and I'm vaguely familiar with the concept of design build, but as you point out, it does leave a lot of things to be built or designed and worked through on the fly, if you will, because not all of the engineering documents will be done, not all of the detailed plans, and as we've heard over and over again, I mean, it's really in the details where this is going to have impact on our citizens one way or another. Do you have any comments on whether, the plus of the design build is that it's supposed to be more cost effective. Do you see that to be true in this instance as well, or should we ask for some sort of different under traditional build design and then contract for this part of the high-speed rail?
In terms of the cost effectiveness, lessons learned from around the country have been that if it's done right, it is a true savings. However, if the what are called the bridging documents that are used for bidding purposes, if they are not detailed enough or leave gaping holes, then there's a lot of potential for very costly change orders in the process. The other issue with that is that there's definitely a loss of control by the owner in the design build process, because as you mentioned, that does turn a lot of things over to the contractor and the contractor's engineer versus having the engineer totally under the owner's control. One thing I did not mention in the presentation is the authority has asked the city of Fresno if there are components of the project that we would like to take the lead on in terms of a cooperative agreement with the authority, similar to what we've done with Caltrans, where there are certain sewer and water that have needed to be moved, or street lights, things like that to be done, where they recognize, this isn't a good fit for the design build contractor. Let's let the city take the lead on this, and the authority fully funds that project. So we're currently looking at that as well. The authority has also talked about a few components perhaps not being city-led, but still being early works of construction that they would go out with a traditional contract. So yes, there are things that we should ask for in that. As far as the whole project going traditional, not design build, the problem is it would not meet the authority schedule for the federal funds. They do need to award a contract and break ground in 2012, and only design build, as I understand it, would get them to that point.
Okay. Well, I think perhaps we ought to give a great deal of consideration of, in our comments on the EIR, suggesting it, if not all of it, certainly portions of it, be done in maybe a more traditional sense, or planning and build aspect than strictly the design build. just because, I mean, as you pointed out, I mean, if the bridging documents aren't complete enough, first of all, it'll drive up the cost potentially out of this world if they aren't already pretty high enough anyway. And change orders are not, at least in my experience, are not the way to go to try to contain costs and deal with something this large a project. So that would be one aspect. I think we ought to include comments in the IR that relate to that. The other part of it that you mentioned, and something that I've put some thought into and have talked with the administration on, particularly on business impacts and how that is. You know, we are going to be the first major metropolitan area that this is going to happen to in the state of California. And as a result, we're the trailblazers. And I think we as a city have gotten to set a very high standard on what it is that we ask for the authority to do in regards to our businesses and the relationships that we have with our businesses, which includes, you know, and my introduction to business relocation has been when we've done it through the redevelopment agency, and the redevelopment agency has a pretty robust and I think mature model. Now, redevelopment agencies and our redevelopment agency won't be involved in this at all. It's not our dollars. It's not that issue, at least from my perspective. But in the health and safety code for redevelopment, you know, it talks about moving costs. It's not just a check for the price of their property. You know, it's you know, some aspect of goodwill. It's a whole number of things that go into that, and I think our comments need to be very specific as to what we expect to see the authority do with our businesses, and you know, even so far as to perhaps, and maybe it's cost effective for the authority to do this, is to go out and purchase property for them to move into. And have, you know, one of the things in economic development that is a trend that's been around nationally is shovel-ready sites. And shovel-ready sites are, you know, the EIR is done, all of the environmental work is done, all of the sewer and major infrastructure is all ready, and this site is ready. And I could see perhaps, and we should make comments to this, that, you know, the authority go out and purchase acreage, hold that acreage available, then when it comes through and Company X needs some place to go, we're able to say, hey, Company X, we've got this, it's ready for you to go, you're not going to be down and out or closed for an extended period of time. We've got a piece of property for you to move into. In the city of Fresno, we need to ask them to help us take out as many obstacles as possible for companies to stay in Fresno. You know, one of my deep concerns is that companies are going to, well, okay, we've got to move. Where do we want to move? You know, well, we know we've got high cost here, we got high cost there. Now all of a sudden it has incentivized them essentially to look elsewhere. Whether it's not in Fresno, maybe it's in Nevada or Arizona or Texas. And I want to be, I think we've got to do some things outside of the conventional box, if you will, and I think the high-speed authority should consider that. But we need to have a very robust comment on what we expect them to do, working with local brokers, you know, on a rotational basis. You know, I really got problems if they're just going to hire people out of Sacramento to come down here and work with our businesses here. I think they need to work with local brokers who know the market, who will work to keep them in the local market rather than, oh, yeah, you know, hey, I know someplace in Reno that has availability. Not that they necessarily would, but I could see the conversation come up. So those are some of my comments and questions as to business relocation and the impacts that it's going to have on our local businesses. The other part of it, too, is, and this is a question, are we right now, are we eliminating stuff from our comments based on discussions with the authority on the costs of it? That, oh, you know, we don't want to do this alignment, or we don't want to do this particular engineering solution because it would be, we know it would be too costly. Are we eliminating stuff from our comments based on the cost analysis already?
Council, I'm not aware of any specific items where, whereas we're looking at it, we had an initial comment and then deemed, well, this is too expensive. The main point for that point of discussion in terms of cost and alternatives is absolutely downtown and at grade versus a trench section. That is absolutely the key area. Right now, again, the EIR does not include that cost. It doesn't show how much more would that be. We know it would be, you know, obviously to construct vertical retaining walls, you know, upwards of 25 feet deep or more to do that. However, it's just how much is that, and does that provide enhancements that work, or really that mitigate impacts, that address things like socioeconomics. Again, the High-Speed Rail Authority wants a vibrant downtown and wants a vibrant area around the stations. So that all goes hand in hand, and we just want to get that. We're proposing to get that type of comment within the record so that it can be evaluated. And the answer may be that, yes, that's absolutely the way to go, or the answer may be that it is too expensive. But however, in order to address those same concerns, here are some alternate approaches to get toward the same goal.
Okay. Well, if I'm hearing correctly, that you're indicating is right now we're not evaluating costs in our comments. I mean, that to me is going to be the High-Speed Rail Authority's requirements to evaluate costs. We need to put in all of our comments regardless of the costs. That's not our issue right now. That'll eventually be something that we'll take a look at, and I know the High-Speed Rail Authority will look at it very heavily. But I mean, I don't want us to throw out a good alternative or a better alternative or the best alternative because, you know, High-Speed Rail Authority has said, you know, but that's going to cost a lot. I'm like, no, that's your issue. That's not our issue right now. We want the best impact for the city of Fresno. And, you know, we'll get to that discussion later on. But from my perspective, and I hope and would encourage you that we go ahead and not throw out any comments, particularly for looking at alternatives, based on a cost analysis at this time. You did mention future growth, and I think the future growth part of things, you know, we build for today, but the city's going to grow, you know, for as long as we're around. I mean, the next 25 years, we're seeing that discussion with a lot of WEGA, the West Area growth area, SAGA. Certainly the West Area growth is going to be heavily impacted by this inability to get over there. So the future growth aspect of this, I think we need to ask them to build for things now, for what we know is going to be the growth pattern of the city for the next 25 or 30 years, and include comments in the EIR that says that we would expect them to mitigate those measures even as the city grows beyond 25, 50 years. You know, this enterprise should not then be a cost that ends up being assumed by the city eventually when we get out there and grow in those areas. So if you don't build it now, then we would expect to see, or I would expect to see, an MOU, some sort of development agreement that said, well, you know what, American Avenue is eventually going to be built out, and here's what we think it's going to be built out, or whatever it is further to the south as we see the city grow. And we need you to agree that when that time comes, it'll be an overpass or an underpass. But don't expect the city to foot that bill. And also included with that would be sound walls and things like that. You know, we see like Herndon Avenue grow up and grow more and more traffic on that, and I occasionally get a colleague or a constituent who will say, well, you know, why don't you guys put the wall up higher, right? You know, it was 6 feet. It really should be 8 feet now. But I think those are things that we've got to have in the environmental impact as well. In terms of future growth, one of the areas, and I did run into a constituent who talked to me about it, about a restoring circulation to South Van Ness Industrial District, and they gave me some information on, you know, where we're looking at kind of where it's an overpass, and rather than doing coming down East Avenue where it crosses over Church Avenue.
Yes.
You know, his suggestion was an elevated intersection versus this kind of cutoff where you turn left and then turn right and turn right again to get back up over the overpass, if I understand it correctly. I mean, I think we should probably include comments that say, you know, we want you to take a look at that elevated intersection to allow circulation for that South Van Ness Industrial District. Have we taken a position on that yet, Scott?
Council, this is the Church Avenue grade separation, and it'd be a very, very long bridge, very similar to the Jensen Avenue overpass. It would span Union Pacific, Burlington Northern, and high-speed rail. And so one challenge has been, what about all the industrial businesses in the area, both the ones there now and in the future? So initial feedback from the authority's engineering team was, well, I don't know how we're going to keep East Avenue or Sunland Avenue open that service that area. We now have a solution that is much better than what was initially on the plans. But Councilmember Westerlund, you raise a good question. For Church and East, would that be a better solution? We've not yet formally taken a position on that. That would be a pretty significant cost increase there, and probably my biggest concern, the thing we're evaluating is if we take East Avenue up to Church, as the constituent had laid out, who maintains that 30-foot high vertical wall that holds up East Avenue, both in terms of structurally and then as it gets, because we know ultimately it will get tagged, there will be graffiti there, and how that's dealt with. And
sure.
Is that the city's obligation? Is that the authority's obligation? So we are exploring that in the comments.
Well, and I appreciate it. I think we need to have that more direct circulation out of East Avenue. You know, we've got an EDA grant pending with the Department of Commerce, which I think is being evaluated today, to try to really redo and upgrade and job expansion in that particular area. And this is one area that I've got a great deal of concern that we don't lose the circulation in that area. And so, yeah, it may be very costly, and there may be some of those issues that need to be addressed. But I would imagine, I've got to imagine high-speed rail is going to have some graffiti abatement in the life of the program. I mean, unless they go the European model and they just let it, people tag everything and graffiti everything over, you know, going in and, you know, rail line into their cities, which I've seen plenty of that before. So anyway, that is and I know that's the one concern that I know, that specific intersection that's a concern of mine. And I got to imagine there's probably 10 more just like it that I haven't seen or had the ability to hear directly from a constituent on. But you know, as far as I'm concerned, I think we put them all in, because one of the things we've learned about EIRs, if it's not in there, then you've lost it from a legal perspective, even though you can still work and negotiate with the developer or builder on that. So. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Mosier.
Councilmember Westerlin, I do want to flag an item for you. The city in this case is, as you're aware, not the lead agency or even a responsible agency, as we typically are when we process EIRs through our land use entitlements and so forth. As a commenting agency, we're similar to the public making comments in the EIR. Because of our unique commenting status here, the staff has requested that our office do a high-level review of their comments and not an in-depth analysis of this draft EIR. I say that just to note for you, if there are specific concerns that council has and wants to have those on the record so that if an issue comes forward where the high-speed rail representatives are not in agreement with us and we want to pursue a challenge on that, we do have to have those specific concerns noted with substantial evidence in the record. So if there is something that rises to that level of concern on the part of council, I would suggest you highlight that to staff at this point. We can work with staff to develop that level of detail, because right now we have simply done a high-level analysis of the draft EIR before you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I would at least put that in for the South Van Ness access and circulation, just as the one that I'm aware of and know. And I will trust, and I know Mr. Mosier does a really terrific job, and I appreciate his staff work on this. So I hope he will flag and otherwise require whatever analysis is needed, and that we get into the record the substantial evidence that why we think what we think and why it's potentially a better better mitigation measure than another. So thank you. Thanks, Councilman.
Member Borges.
First, I want to thank Scott and Mayor Swearingen, City Manager Scott, for helping put together our ride-along. That was loads of fun. In the van was Councilmember Baines and myself and Katie and a couple of others. We were able to actually drive along Golden State to see where the proposed rail would be, and in real terms, what would it look like. And wow, what a daunting project this looks to be. So, a couple of weeks ago, the three of us most impacted council members, Member Baines to my left and Member Zhang, well, also to my left in the political sphere, I suppose. But anyways, we had actually put forward a letter to identify a few questions that we hoped would be answered, and we were able to meet with staff in offline to discuss. But I want to pose a few more so that people know where exactly we are heading with this. The way Member Westland brought up point, and in the letter I did too, is as we anticipate individuals having to be relocated or leaving, one, quantifying the potential loss of tax base. What does that mean in real terms for us? That's something that's going to be very important as we try to figure out the ultimate impact to our community. Also, a lot of these businesses, I imagine, if they don't leave town, are going to want to relocate to a similarly convenient location, which will probably mean somewhere in the west side of Fresno. That gets to a very important issue that we need a west of 99 growth plan and high-level advanced discussions on how we can push this forward and not wait necessarily for its incorporation into the general plan update. The other is the appraisal costs in that process. I posed one specific example to you, Scott, and maybe you can comment on it as well, is that imagine business owner X purchased property in 2006 that's worth, at that time, $150,000. Now it's worth $100,000. As the rail comes in, how does that individual owner's note get satisfied? because the current value is only 100, would we anticipate having to pay off the bank note to the full amount? And if so, how is that built into the overall business plan? Because there's got to be significant inflationary elements to this project that would otherwise skyrocket the projected costs of the business plan, which is now supposed to come out in early November. Maybe you can comment on that.
Council, regarding issues of lenders and also negative equity on property, just from my own experience seeing projects, how Caltrans has treated that, principally they've been the ones who have dealt with that for the most part. It's always a question of what do you do with that lender, especially if the project, if the authority elected to go through a resolution of necessity and utilize powers of eminent domain for that acquisition. I am familiar with situations where, for example, Caltrans or different cities have elected to basically to pay off the lender, because otherwise the question is, when this property is acquired, if it is worth less, where does that money go? How does that shortfall get made up? And so I'm not aware of any formal policy that the High-Speed Rail Authority has taken on that, but certainly that question could be incorporated into comments in terms of impacts on businesses and property owners.
I guess at what point are we going to have the best opportunity to force this issue to be discussed? If the business model is coming out in November, on November 1, if I read correctly last, how could anything like this be quantified? I mean, it's going to have to be a parcel by parcel analysis, and it would seem that the cost of this project would just go up and up and up.
And that is a big question, in that, again, the plans that are associated with the EIR are what has been called the 15% level. And in my career, I'd never seen a 15% level of plan before. Typically, the terminology is 30% is a conceptual design, 60 is kind of a schematic draft plan that gets to better level of detail, and then 100% is a constructible set. That's a set of bid documents that you can hand to a contractor, say, this is exactly what I want. So 15% is kind of this new term. What was that? And really what we're seeing, for example, is at these locations on the plans, it is not laid out as to what happens with those properties. There are locations where, for example, an overpass is proposed. There's a property owner who fronts that street, and the plan doesn't say what's going to happen to them. Would there be, for example, with properties along Shaw Avenue, there's one near the overpass where they'd lose all access to Shaw with that extended overpass. Well, could they be provided, could an access through an adjacent parcel be negotiated? Well, if so, maybe there's some, who knows, that'll have to be looked at by the appraiser and through the process. But right now there are so many properties where it's unclear, is the building impacted? Is it just the parking lot? What will it take to make them whole? That's all going to be fleshed out in the right-of-way acquisition stage. So in terms of forcing the issue
when is the right-of-way acquisition stage, do you think?
Again, that's an unusual approach here. The traditional model is that you finish all the engineering, finish all the right-of-way acquisition, buy everything you need, and then put it out to bid. That's a process that takes years to get through. So in this case, it would be a design-build contract awarded. The designers, depending on what the final plans are, will dictate how much right-of-way is needed from property owners and how things are reconfigured. So this is really new territory for us as a city. I'm not sure if in the country this level of design build and parallel acquisition of right-of-way has been used.
Well, maybe we can go to an area or a project that may offer some precedent. If, let's say, when 180 was put in, or 168, imagine there was a industrial complex, and they leased out their land, and for the period between the proposal of the freeway and the actual breaking ground for its construction, if individuals that had industrial parks could not lease out their land knowing that this project would be forthcoming, how did they quantify the loss of business? And this is not too dissimilar to the whole Forest City problem that we ran into downtown, is that we had talked as if Forest City was coming. Businesses there couldn't expand. New folks were reluctant to come in, and it stalled those portions of industry for an indeterminate period of time. And I guess when all is said and done is that if we're quantifying a loss and need to make parties whole, I can't imagine how inflationary these numbers are going to make the ultimate business plan. And if they're not properly incorporated, then of course that business plan is only worth the paper that it's on. So I mean, I think we're in a little bit of a quandary here, because we're the conduit between the most impacted parties and the folks higher up the food chain. Even though this is not a City of Fresno project, they're calling us. They're calling Member Baines, Member Zhang. It's amazing. We don't have anything to offer.
Council, I'd just comment on that. As the city attorney mentioned, we are not the lead, of course, not the lead agency on the roll. We're the responsible agency reviewing, providing comments on the EIR. We can ask them to quantify that impact. But and then we have constituents in the city. It's the citizens of the city of Fresno who are those property owners and who we do serve. But meanwhile, as far as the issues raised, that issue is really specifically between that property owner and tenant and the high-speed rail authority. There are historical cases of property owner where, again, the project is laid out, here's what's going to happen, and the property owner does wind up stuck, not able to, or choosing not to move forward with a site plan, with further development, because of the possibility that it may be taken. And there are laws and history in terms of inverse condemnation and those types of practices. But again, if this were a Caltrans freeway project, it would be between Caltrans and that property owner. But we're certainly there in a position of seeking how best to serve and represent those constituents.
Maybe I could pose this to the city attorney's office.
Yeah, if I might add, what you do have is the eminent domain laws associated with the taking of private property by public agencies. That does require due process, just compensation, relocation expenses, things like that. I think the real challenge that you'll get to is the pre-condemnation time period, the uncertainty associated with the pre-condemnation time period, the business uncertainty and problems that creates with trying to keep a business going or expand or do the things that you need to do on a day-to-day basis. There is a concept called pre-condemnation damages, but that's a very difficult concept for individuals to establish. You have to show unreasonable delay, which could be an extended period of time. And that is something that I think you'll see the High-Speed Rail Authority have to grapple with as they go forward. But that would be the place where I think the business owners would look to if, in fact, they felt there were damages beyond the due process and the just compensation and relocation expenses.
My last question is, and I pose this to folks in city management, are there any mechanisms that could keep this project from moving forward? Now, I imagine there can be CEQA challenges, litigation, but is there any political hurdle that must be gone through for these dollars to... Is there any mechanism that could otherwise stop this project? Let me make it very easy.
No, as it stands right now, the dollars that we are talking about have already been committed. They're allocated towards this project. So unless there's a decision by the President to revoke the federal dollars that have been allocated to this project, and there's a reversal in Sacramento not to issue the bonds or not to move forward with the bond sale, which has already been passed by the voters. This project and the funding that we're talking about is obligated towards this particular phase of the project.
In our van trip, it was mentioned that there was an article that Congressman McCarthy from Bakersfield had put out there that essentially represented that he has a plan that could keep this from moving forward. Are you familiar with what he meant by that at the federal level?
I'm not aware of that. Over the last probably year, I've heard different stories about different plans to, pardon the pun, derail the project. But again, my understanding and the understanding of the administration and the authority that these dollars are obligated and cannot be revoked or reallocated to any other project other than high-speed rail and high-speed rail in the Central Valley.
So is it safe for any one of us to make the representation to our constituency that high-speed rail is coming? Be prepared.
Yes.
Thank you.
Baines?
Thanks, Council President. Scott, I think I have a couple questions. I along with Council Member Borges, had an opportunity to, and several staff members had an opportunity to, drive, and the mayor too, to drive the route. And I think I'd seen the route several times on illustrations and high level aerials and whatnot. But I can certainly say that I'm generally a supporter of the high speed rail project. But seeing firsthand the impact is massive, and certainly, in my opinion, gave me reason to pause and rethink maybe some of the way we're asking questions and making sure that this city knows what's to come. I was floored, actually, when you look at what's not going to be there anymore and the changes that are going to occur. It really is something. And I don't know if you have the answer to this particular question, Scott, or if it's going to be more someone else, but how I know that we've been holding meetings here and giving business owners giving everybody an opportunity, but particularly business owners an opportunity to come and ask questions of the administration and the authority. But how proactive, do you know how proactive we are in actually going to businesses that we know right now will be impacted? Are we, for instance, sending them a letter or knocking on their door and saying, hey, your business is no longer going to be here more than likely? Or some businesses we just know. I remember riding along the route, and literally you would just say, just look on this side, and they're all gone. So we know for sure some businesses will just be gone. Are we proactively as a city or as the High Speed Rail Authority knocking on those folks' doors and saying, this is not a theory, we know you're not going to be here when this goes through?
Council, I can't speak for the High Speed Rail Authority in terms of what outreach they've done. I know there have been a lot of meetings held, but in terms of door to door, but I know as a city that we have contacted both the property owner and the businesses who are at those sites. So, in some cases, projects have occurred. I'm not speaking of this one or city projects, but there are cases where whoever the lead agency is, they've chosen just to deal with the property owner. But we've wanted to make sure that we've identified all the businesses on that. The mayor's office has been in the lead on that. We've, as an organization, we've dedicated Amy Huerta, who's done a lot of the small business initiatives and such, and she's done quite a bit of work on that. We've also we've had our GIS people who do the mapping and such. We've taken all those parcel numbers. We've laid out the maps. We've gotten the addresses. So as an organization, the City of Fresno has done a lot of work proactively
and just
to
kind
meet
of
with
facilitating for those businesses, just kind of linking them up with the right folks so they can get their questions answered. I can only imagine the number of questions they would have, but
correct. And a number of questions that, again, with a whole number of these sites, there's a lot of work to be done, which is in some ways very frustrating that that level of detail is not there yet with the EIR and with the plans to show what happens. For example, how close is that high-speed rail track to the building? Okay, once that section is lost, does the business still have a functioning parking lot? Do they have access that works? What is in those buildings? Maybe a property owner, a business has 3 buildings on site, and you look at it and say, well, the main rear building is still there, but they lose these 2 buildings up at the front of the property. Well, but it really depends on what's in there. In talking with some of the commercial industrial developers and property owners, some of the major ones that we've been dealing with, they've noted things like at certain properties there's a business that has some type of really sensitive operation. They're dealing with some type of metalworking, or they're dealing with special hazardous chemicals and such. And is that business, can they function with that building lost? Does that site, does it become too small for them? Do they need to move? And it gets very complicated with a property owner who has a lease, and each one of those property owner-tenant leases has its own complexity. So all of that is going to wind up getting worked out in the right-of-way acquisition process. It won't be fully known here in the EIR from the way the authorities approached it. So again, we've struggled with how best to deal with that. And what we've been moving toward is, again, that comment, addressing the issue in the EIR, and then recommending that team be put together, that it, again, funded by the High-Speed Rail Authority, because just to try as a city to say, well, let's make a team and let's carve out so many staff members, does that mean we stop doing everything else we're doing, just regular city business and impacting people in other ways? And that's not the desire. The desire is definitely to bring in a team, augment the city, work with the authority, perhaps the EDC and other local again, commercial industrial developers, and that team to put this together and make it work.
Right. And to that, it brought up another observation I had when I was writing along the alignment. So I know that, and I appreciate that the city and the administration are proactively trying to tie, make connections with the businesses and raising what I think are extremely legitimate questions. I'm also wondering, are we doing the same thing for those businesses that are not going to be absorbed in the alignment, but will have the unfortunate benefit of some negative peripheral damage? So there are some businesses along the alignment that we're not going that obviously the authority's not going to take, but they're going to have negative repercussions because of the alignment running through. Are we doing the same thing for those businesses too?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
In fact, with the mapping that's been done to show all the affected property owners and businesses, we've gotten a number of questions from people who are not right on the alignment, where the high-speed rail does not pass through their property, and they've contacted us to say, I'm not sure, how am I involved here? What's happening? And for example, at locations like McKinley, McKinley and Golden State, or at Shaw and Golden State, with the grade separation to get the street, under or over high-speed rail, it reroutes those connections between Golden State or Weber and that main street. For example, one person who contacted me was near McKinley and Golden State, and to keep the roads connected, it'll actually require the construction of a brand new street that's shown on High-Speed Rail Authority's plans between McKinley and Golden State to hook the two up. And so that roadway goes through a few parcels. One of them has a site plan, and they were looking to move forward and put in their building in Fresno. And now they're looking at it saying, what do I do? How does this new street connecting between there impact me? How will this work?
Right.
So we have done that outreach and contacted them.
Okay.
Again, primary focus has been on people where it's going right through their property, but these are in the scope of the engagement as well.
And I'm wondering also if the authority, so I know that as we were going along the alignment, there were, like when we were along Railroad, and you were explaining how the businesses on, I believe it was going to be on the west side of Railroad, wouldn't need to be moved. However, with the high-speed train running directly down Railroad, those businesses would, in essence, lose the accessibility to the fronts of their businesses, and there wasn't a proposal to build another street or to give them to give their businesses any other type of access point. So, in essence, even though the authority wouldn't need to take that business, and for all intents and purposes, that business wouldn't be able to function. Is the authority including relocating businesses like that, or is there a plan for those types that will fall in kind of this gray area as well?
Yes, Council. The authority, they are including that in the outreach. They have included them as affected parcels.
Okay.
Once again, that it's going to require basically a property by property analysis, because Railroad Avenue is proposed to be gone, which is the front door for all these businesses, and the question will be, could they stay? Could perhaps could some property be acquired for them to get them hooked up to Golden State, which is essentially behind them at this point? Or should they be acquired and moved? And if they are acquired, if they are all bought out, it gets back to the whole economics impact to the city.
Right.
In that, okay, all these parcels that fronted Railroad, the businesses are gone, potentially. How does that property then get reutilized by other businesses?
I mean, without creating blight and
Correct.
such and so forth. No, I get it.
And unusable remnants. We've dealt with that to some degree in the past with Caltrans, whereas, say, the freeway starts to curve and goes slicing at an angle through properties. You get little triangular remnants, and it's been a real challenge. We have a lot of those out there that are undeveloped right now, and this has potential to do that on a much, much larger scale.
Right. I tell you, that's troublesome. Have we identified exactly, do we have a number of how many businesses? I know you said it's in the hundreds, and I would easily agree in the hundreds after traveling the route, but do we have a number? Do we know what that number is?
I confess I do not have that number off the top of my head, but we could get that information.
I'd like to know what that number is. I know that it's in the hundreds of businesses, but I would estimate that we're in the thousands and maybe tens of thousands of individuals that will be directly impacted from the high speed train. So if you could, Scott, I'd like to know what the number is, and as comprehensive as you can make it too. Even it may not necessarily need to be the businesses that will be directly absorbed, but if we could kind of expand that number to all affected businesses, I'd like to know what that is. You know, my good friend and colleague Lee Brand always tells me the devil's in the details, and we have a good back and forth about that sometimes. And I'm going to steal his statement right here and say I absolutely agree that I'm generally supportive of high-speed rail, but the devil is in the details with this. And I'm not satisfied at the level of detail that we have for some of these questions, and I don't think you are either, Scott, to be honest with you. So I don't know. I like the line of questioning that Councilmember Westerland went down, and Borges as well, and I'm grateful that our city attorney weighed in. I think we need some more detail about some of these questions before, well, I know that I do personally before I get comfortable. Like I said, as a general support, yes, I get high-speed rail, but I certainly, as we're now drilling down and coming down to from the 30,000-foot level to the 1-foot level, I certainly need some more questions answered I'm getting a lot of phone calls, and I don't have answers. And, you know, I don't know who does right now for some of this stuff. So, anyhow, I think that ends up my line of questioning, Scott. And, you know, just, you know, I'll just end with a comment that we need to make sure that if all the councilmen, I would encourage all my colleagues to drive the route and actually take a look at it. It's a massive, massive project. And we need to just make sure that to whatever degree possible, we are protecting our businesses and our constituents. I'm very concerned about the business impact and echo many of your concerns, Member Westerland and Borges as well. I don't want to lose any businesses because of high-speed rail. I mean, that isn't the idea. We want our economy to be strengthened. So I think to whatever extent possible, we need to make sure that we are maintaining our businesses. We are looking out for them. I was pleasantly surprised that not too many residences, people in homes are impacted. So at least directly. I mean, there will clearly be peripheral impact, but as far as direct impact, a lot of our neighborhoods, you know, as far as homes, weren't directly impacted. So that was definitely a pleasant surprise. But I think we should really, really focus on our businesses and making sure that we give all the help that we can to our businesses, finding homes for them that will need homes, and be proactive about that, and find a way to partner with the authority. I don't want to lose businesses. So anyhow, those are my comments. Thanks, Council.
Thank you. Member Zhang.
Thank you, Council President. Scott, also to the team, thank you for the meeting that you had with the 3 council members. It's good to see some of those things incorporated in some of the presentation that we saw here. Obviously, I was not part of the traveling group. I'm still expecting to do that with maybe not a van, but maybe at least a car. The time schedule was a little bit short on my notice, so but it is going to be important for me to have that drive with the staff to ask some more specific questions as we go through. But as I'm hearing this, and I think it still kind of goes with the issues that are raised prior to even the group discussion, that I think at the end of the day, it's about how do we work with our constituency on this. The questions are maybe detailed different ways, but at least what I'm hearing is, you know, are we proactive enough, or are we doing the right things? Are we being diligent enough with all the uncertainty that is with this particular project? Even though the only certain thing that at least I've heard is that it's going to come, but everything else is, you know, we got to wait for this here, we got to wait for this here. We're going to, you know, design build to a certain level, not to this capacity, and then right-of acquisition will address that, and so it leaves a huge gap for at least for this elected to feel comfortable in going out and when constituents call and they have about the impact that it has. So obviously the question of being proactive, making sure that we're no longer just sending out letters and you know making sure that we have general meetings and that we're hoping that there come that we do begin to knock on doors in those that we know for sure. And I think that's important enough for us in terms of the huge impact that this is going to have down that stretch for what needs to happen. Obviously, I'm going to, you know, at some point in time, would love to hear the update in terms of the community meetings that is occurring. That was one of the reasons why, at least for me, didn't move forward with my own specific community meeting, knowing that there's already one that the administration is pushing forward and wanted to support that. But at some point, sometime, would love to have an update as those are happening and see where the comments are and see where those immediate issues are coming forth. But Scott, it's whatever the message, at least that you're hearing, even though it may be a little bit different and diverse from each of the district, at least from my perspective here, I'm hearing our residents, which include business and so forth, that fall into that category, is top priority for us. How we engage, how we prepare, how we address those things that are not being able to address and may not be until the last minute is going to be important for us, at least for me. I think I'm in a similar boat as to Member Baines. Generally, this is a project that I have supported, continue to support it from the beginning. But as the details becomes more unwind and how we go and engage, it's going to be extremely important for me. The other piece is the peripheral projects. That's how that's going to be looked at. You know, you touch on veterans and the cross streets of Princeton, Dakota, Shields. There may be other ones that may not be part of that, and I think it's going to be important for at least that drive for me to kind of listen and see where staff is, and then where at least kind of the outlook where Caltrans or the high-speed rail team is going to be looking for. And I think the idea of that team that you're talking about is going to be crucial. But I'm going to favor the second suggestion, that team doesn't impact what we're already doing in terms of city services. That team has to come, at least from my perspective, come out of the large high-speed rail, and whatever it needs to, however it needs to be addressed or communicated to high-speed rail. That, at least from my perspective, that's how it should be, because this is a project that we're partnering with, but the impact is really weighing on that funding side. And city resources and staff is already stretched thin enough in terms of what we have to do with our constituency. So at least from my perspective, the message should be clear on how that team be developed and where the funding source, or at least where a huge portion of that capacity be brought from. Last thing, Scott, we've looked at some of the initial presentations that you have forth here, and gone to some of the community. And is there one theme that you're hearing that's more consistent from our constituency than from the experts?
I think what I'm hearing consistently from the community is the questions related to the uncertainty of it, or the lack of specificity in the document. People who've even done a good job on their own, they've done their homework. They've gone to the website, they've pulled up the plans, and they still don't see, what does this exactly mean for me? What does this mean for my property? And when will it occur? When will someone be approaching me if this goes forward? When might I have my property acquired? Or things like how will it be done? For folks for constituents in Northwest, when we see things like the Ashland Avenue overpass at Union Pacific has to be reconstructed, torn down and reconstructed to accommodate high-speed rail. If we were undertaking that as a public works project, say if the bridge were deemed unsafe and had to be rebuilt, I think something like that alone would be of enormous city concern as to how we would do that. Can we keep 2 lanes open? Can we keep 4 lanes? How do we design it? How do we make it work? And that is simply one of dozens and dozens of issues of how it's done. And so I think what we're hearing, definitely consensus from the council that more detail is needed. Those impacts need to be specifically addressed, and also how can they either be avoided or mitigated? What's the best plan?
Okay. No, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Council President, I'm done.
Member Quintero?
Thank you. See Chief Dyer in the audience and wanted to congratulate him on getting inducted into the Big Fresno Fair Hall of Fame yesterday with Councilmember Mike Dages. Well deserved. Well deserved. Yeah. Scott, I've got a couple questions. I know that, and just this is basically what I've read in the paper and that type of thing. has there been like any preliminary discussions as to, in the city of Fresno, where the work would begin?
Council, the High-Speed Rail Authority, they'd announced about, I believe, a couple months ago that they were looking at 2 projects as early works of construction. They've been talking about starting with the extension of the Fresno Street underpass, which would be near Fresno and G in downtown. What has to happen there is to accommodate high-speed rail being next to UP. There has to be a bridge built on G Street. Fresno Street's got to extend kind of in its cut low section out to about F Street. And then also they've been talking about that, doing the Church Avenue overpass early on.
Church Avenue overpass?
Church Avenue between Golden State and just beyond East Avenue, so that it would span Railroad Avenue, UP, Burlington Northern. And again, that would be a very similar bridge to the Jensen overpass between Golden State and the Calway area. Very long structure.
It's a big one, yeah.
Very significant amount of construction. So they've talked about those 2 initially, but beyond that, that has not been laid out. One of our big concerns is, as we look at a 5-year window for the authority to construct and spend all of the money, 2012 to 2017, the challenges become how do you not affect one street crossing, not affect one area, and allow it to keep functioning and serve as a relief valve for something else, and have that under construction, in that each of these projects typically take 1.5 to 2 years to build. For example, the Shaw Avenue grade separation in Northwest, that's very similar order of magnitude to the city's project at Shaw and Marks that we were under construction about 1.5 years. Lots of delays are in Southeast when the county built the Clovis Avenue overpass or the Chestnut overpasses. Very similar types of construction, and when you put dozens of those projects all together throughout the city, the question is, do I really have enough time in 5 years to build all those?
Right.
Or will they say that the danger is with design build, does it get awarded to a contractor who says, well, in order to meet this schedule, I have to close all these 6 streets at the same time? I guess the short answer is we really don't know where they would construct, and right now a lot of the control gets put with the design build contractor. The issue that has not been worked out yet is how much does the city have control via our street work permit, issuance of permits, and allowing them to work, and how much of this is the state, a state taking a higher level of authority and being able to say, we trump the city of Fresno's requirements. I am not sure how that aspect of it's going to work out, because we've always been able to collaborate with, say, for example, Caltrans when we've done 180 East, 168, 41, the freeway projects. We've always been able to come to terms with them on, when are we going to close which street or limit lanes and so on.
Well, and it seems right now, because it's still early on and a lot of discussions are going on, that can be a moving target in terms of where you're going to begin. The other question that I have is right now the way that it looks doesn't seem that the city's corporation yard is going to be impacted at this point, or would it?
The corporation yard would be moderately impacted, not the actual property, but High Speed Rail is proposing to close the Divisadero Street crossing, which is right at the fax end of the corp yard. Now, the city has already gated that and limited it to the fax buses coming in and out at this point. So,
I tried getting in there the
Mr.
other day.
Ham and his staff, they've reviewed that and said, okay, with Divisadero lost, how does that work? The fire department, chief and his staff, police department, they've all thoroughly looked at this, and they're evaluating emergency response routes. How does that work? So again, no property would be lost at the corp yard, but we would lose access unless a trench option were developed, and that keeps all the downtown streets open.
Okay, so that would be probably the only city property that might get impacted, city-owned?
There is at least one water well site that's impacted, and there is some other city-owned land along the corridor. The biggest one that we've identified is an actual well site, wherein now it's down in the south Fresno industrial area, and now a new site would need to be located, drill, test, and make sure we can actually get enough water, that it's not a contaminated location, and so on. So that, and again, that's just one of hundreds of details in the project.
It's domino effect.
Correct. And one impact may in turn lead to another and another, and so on.
Well, thank you for the lengthy discussion you and I had. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, Scott, that's everybody. And my colleagues did a great job going through and asking a lot of the questions that I would have asked. And my primary concern, too, is this displacement of businesses and the plan that we come up with or negotiate for these people. Do they stay in Fresno? Do we lose them? Tax dollars. And you're right, it's got to be done, at the authority level, because we don't have the resources to do that. And some of the stuff you mentioned, like looking at the trenching and stuff, practically speaking, it would be a lot easier as far as traffic, but it's got to be an enormous cost. And just the small projects I've done, I know what it costs are moving earth and putting concrete structures up and going below grade. I don't really share the optimism our assistant city manager has regarding whether or not this is a done deal. I think there's so many legal challenges out there from a variety of groups. And I think there's, as Member Board just said, there's some, I don't know what the authority is of Congress to step in on this deal and potentially freeze the funds, but I don't know, it may be eventually something we have to go forward, we have to plan for it, because we have to assume it's going to go, and we'd be foolish and negligent not to do that. But I think there's some serious issues out here that well beyond our level that we have to resolve. But the final question would be, in the end, we can come up with all our recommendations, where we want the station, how the alignment goes, the grade, et cetera. Does the authority make that final decision? We simply make the recommendations?
Council, the authority, they would, their next step, once they receive the city's comments and all the other public agencies, members of the public, they would develop a response to those comments that could range from, yes, we will reevaluate, restudy, and they may wind up having to provide additional documentation. The extreme end would be having to recirculate a document or make a design change to really address it. The other extreme may be comment noted. We don't, as the authority doesn't feel that it's an impact. So that's the next step. But it would not come back to the city for, as we did with, say, for example, the Roeding Park, the zoo expansion. That was a city certification of an EIR. In this case, I'm not sure if the city attorney.
Just to be clear, the October 13th deadline for the comment period is the last opportunity the city will have to get specific concerns, objections that it may have into the record. After that, they will go through the process of responding, and that's why I raised the point of substantial evidence being necessary if there are specific concerns that the council has, that should be included with the information that staff submits by the October 13th date.
Yeah, but by way of example, let's say, for example, we conclude we want the below grade, that's the track alignment, and let's say at some higher level, well, that sounds good, but it's too expensive, so you guys are going to have to take a different option. That's possible, right?
That is possible. Generally speaking, on something like that, it would have to they'd either have to modify the EIR and include a full analysis, or they would do a higher level analysis, and as you mentioned, Council President, that they would conclude that it was too expensive and basically attempt to disregard that without further analysis.
And really, Fresno, I think somebody else said it earlier, we're like the epicenter for this entire, experiment, so to speak, and huge urban area. We're going to be impacted first, and I don't know if that's good or bad in the end. But anyway, thanks for a great presentation, for my council members for a good discussion, and we'll see where it goes.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we're now